All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Candidates After Party with AChessB, looking at the games from the Candidates Tournament 2020 that happened today. We will get into the games, obviously the biggest one being the only decisive game of the round between Ding Liren and Fabiano Caruana. A very, very incredible game from Ding, some great prep from Fabi, but Ding emerged victorious. So kudos to Ding for doing such a good job. And let's jump straight into the game here. We have Ding as white, Fabi as black, and we have d4 from Ding, d5, c4, c6, knight f3. Knight f6 has been played many, many times before. Knight to c3, d captures on c4, and a4. All very standard stuff in the slot. Bishop f5, knight e5, e6, f3, bishop to b4. Knight captures on c4, castles, and king to f2. And this has all been played by a fair lot of people. Samuel Shankland had a game in this position in 2019. So the point behind king f2, while it may look semi-suicidal to move your king like this, white's king should be fairly safe on f2. And the immediate bonus is you unpin this knight right here, and you're prepping pushing the pawn to e4, you're prepping pushing the pawn to g4. So it's a very understandable move, although not something that we might think of right away. So, but Bobby had something prepared, especially for this game, and it's going to be the novelty today. It is e5. And this move is seemingly just giving away a pawn, but Fabi has some preparation behind this move. Knight captures on e5, bishop c2. Not a very easy move to find, but a great move from Fabi, because if Ding decides to go after this, Fabi munches the pawn on d4 and then picks up his piece back, equalizing in material. So very impressive preparation here from Fabi. Bishop to c2. Ding sees through this, plays queen to d2, not walking into this line of queen captures on d4 that we just mentioned, and now c5 from Fabi. Again, if Ding wants to capture the bishop, he runs into exactly the same line that we had already mentioned. The only difference is black does get the additional tempo with c5, which will make the position slightly more comfortable for black. So after c5, Ding decides to go for what the computer is calling right here an inaccuracy, but when you get deeper, it really is a great move from Ding, d5. So now this pawn is protected, and he is threatening to snap up this bishop on c2. Now, a very, very interesting move here from Fabi would be bishop to e4. And this is a recommendation from the engine, and it's just insane that this works, because if the bishop gets captured, you end up losing the queen, the knight captures e4, and bishop captures d2. Or if after knight captures on e4, or sorry, you could play bishop captures on c3 as well, and he's completely busted because you're winning a second piece as well. So Fabi would have had his chances with either getting 2 pieces for the queen or just picking up 2 pieces. So that's very good for Fabi. But a very interesting engine line here after e5. This bishop to e4 move, exploiting somewhat the position of the white king on f2. So after d5, Fabi plays bishop to b3. And again, this is where we see how bishop e4 might have been helpful for Fabi, because now Ding can play e4, which he does. And now Ding has this very nice pawn center. And despite Fabi's preparation and him unleashing the novelty in this game, and him still moving very fast, and Ding having burned 45 minutes on the clock already, despite all this, Ding is still fighting through the position and is slightly better. Rook to e8 again played very, very quickly from Fabi, but Ding continues to churn out very impressive moves. And the sneaky threat again from Black is tactics on e4. If Ding decides to go for a line like knight to c4, Fabi has this very nice rook captures on e4, f captures, and knight captures on e4 with check, knight captures e4, bishop takes d2, knight e takes d2. And we get a very, very interesting position where white gets two pieces and a rook for the queen, but Fabi is still probably slightly better after queen to h4, queen to d4 check, and capturing on d5. And Ding's king just is not going to be safe here. Say queen c4, king g2, bishop back to c2. And Ding's king may have long-term issues about its safety. So despite Fabi having a bishop, knight, and rook for the queen, or sorry, Ding having a bishop, knight, and a rook for Fabi's queen, Fabi would be slightly better here. So that's a very interesting idea. If Fabi even makes if Ding even makes the second best move recommended by the engine here. Instead, Ding continues to churn out great moves, which is amazing to see Ding's resiliency here after falling in both of his first two games. He is still fighting against the world #2 winner of the candidates in 2018, and he's emerging with a slightly better position despite being down on time and facing a very large amount of preparation. Queen f4 by Ding, again, very, very precise. c4 by Fabi, again, played extremely fast, and this is a pawn sacrifice. But again, it really is the best move in the position for Fabi. Knight b to d7 is comparable, but again, c4 played almost instantly. Fabi showing he's still in his preparation. Ding is going to be an hour down on the clock here and having to think for himself. So it's really amazing how Ding was able to fight back and still keep his slightly better position. Again, Ding continues to make the best moves. Knight captures on c4. Knight b to d7. Again, mashed out instantly by Fabi. And Ding continues to think and continues to find the best moves. Bishop to e3 played after about another 5 minutes. Ding is continuing to find possibly the only moves to keep his advantage in a very difficult position against a player who's rated 2840. So very big kudos to Ding, especially after losing his first two games, for really fighting back and keeping himself in a resilient position. Fabi plays knight to f8 very quickly. The only mistake of the game, according to the computer, but if this is still his preparation, he probably should have known that the computer was not so high on knight to f8, labeling it a mistake here in the lead chess analysis. So Is Fabi going for practical chances here after knight to g6, which he plays on the next move? We'll see. But again, Ding is far down the clock and again has to find the only move that really guarantees him any sort of advantage. Bishop to d4. And now Fabi plays knight to g6. And even though the computer labeled knight to f8, Fabi's previous move, as the mistake, in terms of the evaluation, this really is the move that's the mistake because Ding has this very strong move that doesn't really make sense. Queen to c1, and the computer is struggling to find a move for Fabi rather incredibly. The recommended line is capturing the pawn on e4, which just gives a piece by the looks of it for a couple pawns. But it's rather incredible that the computer really doesn't see that much for Fabi at this position in the game. But Ding finally makes his first inaccuracy, plays queen f5 fairly quickly, and Fabi trades on c4 and queen to c7. Bishop back to e2 and bishop to c5. Fabi is incredibly up on the clock here. We're talking 75 minutes. His preparation, giving what Stockfish labels as an equal position, and he has 75 more minutes on the clock to think. So I would think this would be a major opening success for Fabi, even though he's only reaching an equal position at this point. Trades on c5, king f1. And now Fabi needs to slow down a little bit here and find rook e5, which pushes the queen back and might give him chances after queen to b4, targeting b2. However, h6 is played, and at least in my opinion, this is too slow for Fabi. There are no immediate back rank threats for Ding, and I'm not convinced of how necessary h6 was. Ding gets a little bit of a chance to consolidate here, rook to d1, queen to b6, rook to d2. And Ding is again slightly better. Queen e3, rook c2. Ding is holding his ground. a6 from Fabi, queen back to h3, b5, and we have queen to g3. And Fabi plays b4, and it's hard to blame him for making this move. But again, the computer recommendation, rook e to c8, looks stronger because, again, the threat of b4 pinning to the rook is quite strong. So likely a captures b5, knight to d1 gets played to hit the queen, queen to b3, rooks get traded on c8, and after queen to d6, Ding still has a slightly better position, but this at least is optically better for Fabi after something like rook to c1. Ding's pieces are a little bit tangled, while Fabi's major pieces are active. So it would have certainly behooved Fabi to look at the lines after rook e to c8, which I'm assuming that he did look at, but didn't think was good enough. So he said he went for b4, which was probably inaccurate to be played first. Knight d1, queen b3, rook to d2. And Fabi decides to grab the pawn here. The problem is this gives Ding a bit of a chance to consolidate his position because, yes, Fabi gets his pawn back. He's down one pawn right now. He sacrificed two pawns earlier. but he's still down material after the next couple of moves. Ding starts to centralize his pieces again, and if Fabi can't make use of this 2-on-1 on the queen side, then he really has a strategically lost game, which is pretty incredible given that there's been fairly precise play from both sides. Knight h5 by Fabi, knight f2, queen d7, and f4. Ding immediately starts pushing in the center, and Fabi doesn't have much to do. If you run knight f6, you get e5, and trying to grovel and hold on to material really is not going to be very good for Fabi because these pawns are already extremely strong, and Ding is going to play king to g2 and move this rook over and support the pawns. So Fabi gets desperate here, plays knight h captures on f4, g captures, knight captures f4, king f1 to guard the bishop on e2 from Ding, queen to d6, rook to g1. Finally, Ding gets this rook into play. Ding sub 8 minutes on the clock, but they're going to reach time control at move 40 soon, so he is very much okay. f6 from Fabi, bishop b5. Again, activation of his pieces. This bishop will eventually find a nice home on c6. Not immediately, but in the future. Rook e7, b3, preventing a4 really once and for all, and shuts down the entirety, really, of Fabi's counterplay. And rook to f8 from Fabi, but now Ding continues to apply pressure. Rook c2, knight back to e6. Obviously, taking the knight would be bad because the queen hangs, so queen e3 from Ding, knight g5, h4. And now Ding is being the one who is developing the threats against his opponent's king, despite Ding having very little pawn cover, if at all. Knight f7, rook c6, very powerful. And here, commentators were already saying live that Fabi should resign. And I believe while that still may be the objectively correct case, it must be really disappointing to have the huge opening prep that Fabi did for this game and achieving equal position, being 75 minutes up on the clock. It may be really psychologically hard to just admit that the game is lost, but the game really is queen to b8, queen to c5, queen to d8, and we can see that Ding has a much better position and already flashing some tactics here. Rook captures on f6. This pawn is pinned to the king, so the rook is immune. Ding's won a pawn, and now is a clean bishop up with Fabi having very passive pieces. King h8, rook f5, rook c7, bishop c6. This bishop is very nice, very, very nice on c6, and maybe Fabi's last chance for counterplay would be a4 now that the bishop is pinned. It still seems to be insufficient to rook to g6, and if Fabi wants to keep pushing, d6 is very strong, and there really is not much to do. This rook on c7 is in no man's land right now. If it retreats to its only safe square, queen to d4 targets g7, and there is no escape. The computer shows a mate in 13 evaluation after queen f6, mate in 11 evaluation after knight e5, and a mate in 5 evaluation after rook to g8. So this is really hopeless for Ding. Sorry, for Fabi, but it might have been worth it to try something. So he goes for it. a4, b captures on a4, b3, rook g3, b2. At this point, Ding just plays rook b3. There's counterplay over for Fabi, and there's no way to get to defend this pawn at all. There's no way to attack Ding's king at all, and there's nothing more to be done here at all for Fabi. And if I was playing this in my own game as black, I would likely have resigned by now. But this is the candidates tournament, and the stakes are very high. So Fabi either decides to continue playing on to hope for a swindle, because if every half point can be very precious in this tournament, but I think that that hope would be uh, unfounded here, and probably should resign. But I understand him trying desperately for a swindle here. He's down what's going to be a piece and 2 pawns, but he's gonna keep trying for a couple more moves, trying to see if he can swindle Ding out of something. But kudos to Ding for playing the rest of the game very flawlessly and consolidating his advantage here. So the remaining moves: knight to d6, rooks are traded on f8, rook takes on b2, queen f4, check, king h7, queen to c2, and Fabi has the very nasty threat of e5 check, which is not very hard to, which is very, very difficult to stop, and e5 winning straight away, knight f5, and d6 is likely going to be sufficient to win as well, and there's no stopping the runaway d pawn. Ding chooses the method after queen e4, queen to c1, king g2, g6. This knight has to be defended, but after rook b3, there is no counterplay for Fabi at all. The computer evaluation is massively up for Fabi, equivalent of more than 3 rooks worth, and this game is really over. Ding can swap rooks with rook b7, and there is no more counterplay for Fabi here, so he resigned. So this vaults Ding Liren back into the pack, if we could say. He is at 1 point out of 3, certainly not ideal, but he played extremely well today. The sending pawn loss of Ding's moves for the game was 20. He made 4 inaccuracies, no mistakes, and no blunders. So an amazingly precise game from Ding, and give Fabi some credit too for his play. He has a 33 sending pawn loss, 4 inaccuracies, 1 mistake, no blunders, and I found it personally very impressive how one game could seem so one-sided, but in fact really be a great slugfest between both players. Ding just had control the whole way, though. Very, very good game for Ding. Kudos to him. We'll look over the games that were drawn fairly quickly here. Moving to Yuri and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Fairly quick draw. If you don't know, the rules for the candidates is that there cannot be an agreed draw before move 40. The players drew on move 30 here through a 3-move repetition. So let's check this game out. We have d4, knight f6. We have Maxime's favorite Grunfeld defense, and already we see a very interesting move here from Anish. Bishop to d2. And this could either signal opening prep, or perhaps that Anish is aiming for a slightly more peaceful result today, which ended up certainly being the case. Bishop g7, e4. Trades happen on c3, c5. A very standard move in the Runefeld to strike at white's center. This pawn is not really needing to be touched, because after bishop takes on c3, b takes on c3, white's pawn structure is a bit of a mess, and queen a5 is already very decent for black. So d5, from Anish. Trades happen on c3, castles, queen to d2, queen to d6, f4, e6, bishop to c4, b5. This has all been played. Boris Yefand and Lenier Dominguez Perez, or Jan Nepomniachtchi and Evgeny Tomshensky have played games in this line. Bishop takes on b5, e captures d5, and here's the novelty from, well, not quite the novelty yet from Anish, but bishop c4 is a very interesting move, exploiting this pin on the d-file and really keeping the game simple. Knight to d7 is the official novelty from Maxime. Castles, knight b6, bishop b2, and there is still some life to this game. d4, e5, queen d7. C captures d4, rook a to d8. Again, capturing on d5 would be bad news here, because white would lose a piece after all is said and done and run into nasty things on the g-file. So rook a to d1 was played, bishop takes, rook takes f3, queen takes d4, and Maxime just simplifies the position. Evidently, he was happy from his win yesterday against Ding and keeps the position very safe for him. Material is equal, rook d8, bishop c1, knight c4, king f2, and this really is a draw offer from Anish, welcoming the repetition after knight b2, rook d2, knight c4, rook d3, knight b2, rook d2, knight c4, rook d3. So fairly speedy draw by both players. Seems like neither of them was really in a fighting mood today, and I feel like this is a decent result for both players. Anish goes to 1 out of 3, and while he didn't win this game, he certainly didn't even lose it either, so he gives himself a chance going into the rest day tomorrow to recoup, and Maxime goes into the rest day at 2 out of 3, and he's in a very good position, tied for the lead. Again, he was the late add-on to the candidate, so he really should be happy for where he is right now. So, moving on to game 3 today, Grischuk versus Wang Hao. We have a nice Petrov defense from Wang Hao. This is all very standard stuff in the Petrov. And d4, d5, bishop d3, bishop d6. And this is, again, very normal for a Petrov. c3 and c5 is the novelty here from Wang Hao, but it really makes sense. You're striking at white center and you're playing for play for your pieces. Then that'll come to c6 and you'll get play. Knight d2, knight c6, knight f3, castles. Trades on d4 happens. e5, Wang Hao detonates the center. Trades happen on e5. And this game is really equal. Despite Grischuk having the bishop pair, he is, again, signaturely down on time. And it's, again, going to be a very equal game. Even though the computer assessment is plus 0.3 for Grischuk here, this game really should be drawn because Grischuk is lower on time. f3, bishop d4, king h1, rook a to c8, and the rest of the game was played very well by both players, slowly trying to creep forward from Grischuk, getting himself into time trouble, trying to find a way to crack through Wang Hao's defenses, and he secures what seems to be a modest advantage, but Wang Hao is never really in trouble here. 94, taking the piece here it's not really a piece sacrifice because of the threat of e3 check. You have to give back the piece, and there's really no problems. So 94, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook e1, e captures on f3, rook d7, and now while the position is staying numerically equal, Grischuk is starting to manufacture some practical chances, and that's really what you want to do in an over-the-board game like this is you want to manufacture practical chances, give Wang Hao a chance to go wrong. King Fate, Rook H1. He's playing for mate on H8. Obviously, it's not going to be fallen for, but he's going to grab the B pawn, and he's going to get this pawn as well, but Wang Hao, from sacrificing this B pawn, the F pawn wasn't going to be held anyway, but by sacrificing the pawn, he gets a lot of activity for his rooks. Trades happen on G5, and this game really quickly moves into a very drawish phase. Rook A1, and trades happen, and with only one pawn on the board for both sides, there really is no winning chances. Because if Wang Hao simply doesn't get mated, then there will be no problem holding this game, and Wang Hao is a high enough rated player to not get mated in a position like this. You just repeat moves, king to G8, and there is no mate for white. So let's check out the final game of the day, Kirill Alexenko versus Jan Nepomniachtchi. We have a French, which is interesting. This is the first French that we've seen in the candidates thus far. And Nepo immediately goes for the Vinaver variation. E5 from Alexenko. C5 striking at the center from Nepo. A3. Trades happen. Knight E7, H4. All been played before. Queen C7, Knight F3, B6. Bishop to B5 check. Bishop E7. Bishop E2. Is the novelty in top chess. There's one game that you can see right here where it has been played, which is from 1996. Practically the novelty here. Bishop A4 from Jan Castles. Knight D7. This is very, very solid for Alexenko, who really has no problems, but it's also going to be difficult for him to break through to Jan's king here. H6, Rook A2, Knight F5. And there really isn't much to do here from both sides. A6 captures, queen captures C5, Rook B4, B5, and practically, while this may be a fine move, it is slightly risky for Jan because he traps his own bishop on A4. Given it is protected, he's not going to lose the bishop anytime soon, but it is putting the bishop out of play. And after some more maneuvering from Jan, Alexenko decides to give the exchange, which really doesn't mean anything because this bishop on A4 is locked out of play. So Alexenko, in reality, has two pieces for the exchange. Rook E1, Knight B8, and so he decides to start taking a look at Jan's king, but there really isn't too much there. G6, and this might have been Alexenko's only chance for an advantage after bishop takes on G6. It sacrifices the piece, but in reality, this is probably better for white, and this would have been Alexenko's best chance at an advantage. But instead of going for it, H5 captures happens, and Jan is going to be fine for the rest of this game, and he manages to because Kirill played C3. Jan wiggles his bishop to C4, and he really doesn't have problems here. Both kings are slightly exposed. And just by accepting the piece on C2, Jan basically says, yeah, I'm just going to accept perpetual check here. And the game ended in a draw, the third peaceful game of the day. So that is it for the games today. Tomorrow is the rest day for the players, so there will be no stream. Tomorrow from AChessB, the candidates after party will not be on tomorrow, but we will be back on Saturday with another episode, checking out those games and seeing what's going to happen there. So thank you all for watching this episode of the Candidates After Party, and I hope to see you all next time. And today we're going to do something a little bit different, and we are going to pull for a raid here, something I don't do huge amount, but we're just going to raid Anna Cramling, and we're going to take off for the rest of today. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys enjoy Anna's stream. So adios.